Hi and welcome to my Exploring Design Identities Sketchbook video. So to begin with, we looked at different design practices and looked at specific ones that interested us. And mine specifically, I definitely wanted to take forward an ethnographic approach. So next, when we got tasked with different case studies for us to look at in order to find themes that we wanted to draw from in our own projects, I really enjoyed looking at the themes of abstraction and recontextualizing, as well as this idea of behavior and intimacy as like a tool that can be molded with by design. And I really liked a strong narrative storytelling role. That was something I definitely wanted to frame my project going forward. I wanted to see how human intimacy can be hindered or enhanced, and the case studies I looked at definitely helped influence me and draw inspiration from and just reframe my way of thinking. I wanted to shift the definition of human connection in spaces like the home, and look at this kind of collaborative community and how people interact with each other. So whenever I was establishing my context group, I took forward looking at families and what constitutes home, as well as like what connection is and what points of contact are integral to what fundamentally family is. I also found it really nice and helpful to establish a potential outcome that I was aiming to achieve, and I really wanted to have an immersive experience and create a dynamic environment that would shift perspective for people. But it definitely helped me keep my focus on a project, and it was really nice to have this kind of visual tone established, as I feel like it definitely helped influence and evolve my project over time. And we were asked to provide a project brief at the beginning of the project just to help frame us, and I found this really useful just to keep my design in a certain lane so I could fully explore everything within this brief rather than getting lost in such a broad topic that is home. So my brief was to use design to dissect family dynamics within the home, using ethnographic research to really fuel this narrative, and then subvert them as a tool of thought/discussion on intimacy through this immersive experience. So I began my ethnographic research really trying to frame what is home and what do people perceive as home, what does home look like and feel like to them. And I'd never conducted interviews before for design, and I found this quite challenging at first, but rather than restricting myself to a list of questions, I found it really beneficial just to have a conversation. And how do people feel about home? And this is so interesting to me because home is such a unique environment that we as people are in. Who people are when they are at home is so different than any other environment. It is one of the most stripped back, vulnerable places for people. So before I fully delved into my ethnographic research, I began looking at myself, and I drew using mark making and shapes an intuitive map of me going through the sensations of walking through my house. And this definitely informed me, and I found it really beneficial, and this was definitely a key way I found to effectively visualize and interpret people's opinions of home. So I looked at different hotspots within the home as well, with the living room throughout the project taking a very overarching highlight, as it plays such a massive role in familial dynamics, and the space is really dictated with how people interact in it. So when I began my ethnographic research, it was really fulfilling and rewarding, as I had these really in-depth conversations with people, of them describing their homes and me prompting them with quite abstract questions in regard to their home, which I think was really useful because people know their own homes better than anyone else. But when I phrased very weird, strange questions, it definitely made them rethink their home in a different light. I wanted to know where the energies lie, where the air moved, like where were the points of conflict and tension, where did the room feel light and airy, what was the tone of this wall, and it was definitely interesting to watch people's feedback as I put them in a position to definitely rethink and reframe what they visualized as their home. So my project definitely became about interpreting space, and I really wanted to look past the physicality of stuff. I wanted to look at revealing the layers of human connection that the spaces reflect, and almost dissect the home as a person itself. So as I continued my ethnographic research, I found it really rewarding creating this visual language where energies and dynamics of space and people and dynamics were reflected, and it allowed me to look back and have this opportunity exploration where I took forward the idea of this interaction disruptor. But looking back, all of these played such a huge role in my final outcome, which is quite fun to see how, even though I didn't necessarily fully explore the rest of these, they played a big part in my project. So at this point, I continued family dynamics, and I've been able to visualize it in 2D and in this illustrative form, but the next step was to focus on visualizing in 3D and using data to inform shape in a more physical way. So at this point, I continued on looking at interaction disruptors, as well as exploring different 3D forms and just using shape to explore what home can be. And I really like this concept of home as a being, as I'm designing for the home not as a space but as a person, which was a really great way to reframe the way I design in my own design practice. So at this point, I definitely had two strains of artifact that I wanted to maybe explore: a more narrative storytelling object looking at history and family, as well as creating almost like a sentient object, an extension of the being that is home, and having an object that grows and evolves with you, and maybe exploring that through different senses. So I looked at how objects interact with people rather than people interacting with objects, and looking at light and airy materials, things that feel alive, that are raw and fluid. And I found this was a great point to go back and conduct more interviews. I wanted to look at how do people change their behaviour when someone is present, or when it feels like someone's listening. As people will act differently, whether they're more quiet or putting on an act. But a really interesting takeaway I got from it was that maybe more tensions would hide under the surface. There'd be less fights, but instead more sly comments and passive aggression. So this definitely propelled me into looking at the effects of a presence, and it was definitely a pivotal moment in my project, because I wanted this disruptive artifact to be an extension of the home, and that would live within it and observe conversations and the tensions and the dynamics. I wanted its presence to be really commanding, and I wanted you to be able to feel it in the back of your mind as it listened and breathed and hummed with your dialogue, with your family. So at this point, it was also really nice to have a narrative as a part of this overarching story of this sentient artifact. So I started exploring a family that I would stylize and tell this narrative of the dweller, which is the character of the home. And I found it really lovely to just have the dwelling clan be visualized, and show the different conflicts within the clan, and which ones hold the glue together. And it was really nice to establish this physical boundary where the bones of the house keep them separated, but during their moments of connection and bonding, the dwelling's presence is very clear. It's at the hearth of the clan. So I continued on exploring characters and showing their relationships with each other. And this was a really beneficial task in creating my zine, because I'd never done that before, and I found it just really fun illustrating. So at this point, I was able to start storyboarding as well, where I wanted to bring together all my illustrations and the recurring motifs that kind of came apparent in this project. And I wanted the narrative to really tell the impact of the dwelling and its impact on the clan. And when I was making this zine, I'd never made one before, but I really wanted it to be melodic and lyrical almost. But I wanted it to be provocative and short at the same time, and really bring together all the characters within my story and how they all feed into each other and are one. And it was really nice to have this kind of piece that grounded my project, because it's quite abstract and something that really makes it more digestible for people as they experience my project. And this definitely put me on the thought process of creating my experience visuals and how I wanted people to digest my project in an exhibit form as well. So at this point I started looking at using the projector and having this visual language of the energy of the dwelling, and I really liked it. It feels alive with you. You breathe it in, it makes it feel sentient, and I really liked propelling this idea. And alongside this, I was also still further developing the dwelling's physical form, how it manifests in an artifact. So model making was a very extensive process. And though challenging, I found it really engaging. I really liked the main bit of the form being irregular and porous and a bit rough, and it really made it feel real and alive. So I ended up using mod rock for the base, and then I embedded beads and wire and string, and it made it feel really delicate, which complemented and contrasted it well, I think. And I really liked this kind of raw look that the model had, so it could be curated to each family, the experience of each clan. It would melt into every environment. And it was nice to also just look back at my design practice at this point, because there had been a very strong visual presence, which I'd been allowing to just flourish and evolve on its own. And it really became a core aspect of my project and just my practice in design. And it really allowed me to kind of find a visual voice that I would love to explore even more. And at this point, I also built upon the brief I had written at the start of the project as my project developed itself as well. So I wanted to emphasize that I wanted to personify the home as an entity and provoke changes in behaviour within the home. And it was lovely to just establish materiality and the kind of voice I wanted this project to have. And at this point, I was able to fully engage with this exhibit that I wanted to curate. And curating the exhibit really allowed for all of the different elements throughout the project to coexist together in a very in this experiential exhibit where they all complement each other and thrive. And it was really fulfilling just to see my design process actualized in this exhibit using layers and shadows of translucency, and I had a projector with an animated background to make it feel alive, and there was speakers playing sound which just pulled you deeper into the experience, which I found really fulfilling. And at this point I wanted to use coding and programming to write a script that would allow the dwelling to hum and drone, and this is the code here. I didn't have time to actualize this fully, but if I had more time, I'd get the circuitry and operate the code script. But how it works is basically the dwelling has motion sensors that as you get closer to it, the frequency of volume and irregularity of the humming and droning would increase, letting you know it's listening. With the code having a heartbeat embedded into it, so you're reminded of its sentience. And as a final point in the project, I placed my dwelling in situ in a home, and it was really fulfilling to have this be an endpoint for the project, where people were able to interact with it within their own home. And a final reflection, I really enjoyed the curation process, just with my design practice throughout the project and the influences that my ethnographic research gave me, with me at the core as the interpreter and the storyteller and the scribe, bringing to life what is the dwelling. And it's definitely a project I'd want to take forward in the future because there's so much more to be explored with it. All right, Thank you.